Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back from the video. My name is Justine Hendricks, and I'm the Chief Corporate Sustainability Officer at Export Development Canada, and it is such a pleasure to be with you all today. I'd like to begin by acknowledging that I'm joining you all from EDC's head office in Ottawa, which is located on the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe people. We value taking these moments to deepen the appreciation of our Indigenous communities wherever we are, and to remind ourselves of our shared debt to Canada's First Peoples. I'd also like to thank the Canadian Chamber of Commerce for convening this important event today. As a long-standing partner of the Chamber, EDC has certainly greatly benefited from the knowledge, connections, the insights, and friendships that has been developed between the two organizations, and for that, we're very thankful. I'd also like to thank the Chamber for bringing conversations of national importance to the forefront and their continued and relentless championing of the Canadian business community. As we all know, a healthy business community contributes to a healthy Canada. For those of you who might be unfamiliar with EDC, we are a financial crown corporation dedicated to helping Canadian businesses make an impact at home and abroad through their exports. We do this through financial products as well as knowledge services, which help Canadian companies confidently enter new markets, reduce risks, innovate, and grow their business as they go global. Our international footprint, economic insights, and deep understanding of global markets enable us to keep track of what's going on in business around the world. And alongside our partners, such as the Canadian Chamber of Commerce, and in collaboration with financial institutions and insurance providers, we support and protect Canadian businesses. I'm very pleased to be here as this is a topic of great importance to Canadian companies across all industries in Canada, and certainly one that is quite close to my heart. As EDC's Chief Corporate Sustainability Officer, I have the responsibility of ensuring that we're not only a company that champions Canadian trade, but one that is driven by strong corporate values, prioritizing the environment, social justice, inclusion and equity, and strong corporate governance. At EDC, we strive to stay true to our values. We place ESG at the center of everything that we do, including our own workplace and through every business transaction that we undertake. As I'm sure the panelists will share today, integrating ESG across corporate strategy and operations is not easy. I know from our own experience at EDC that it comes with many challenges, but with all challenges come also many opportunities. And I also know that it is so critical to building stronger, more resilient, and competitive companies. So before I pass it over to the distinguished panel today, I would like to share some important insights from a survey that we commissioned earlier this year of more than 350 small and medium-sized companies across Canada, representing most sectors and all levels within the organization. The objective of this survey was to better understand their perception of ESG, including the incorporation of ESG into business decision-making, and this is what we found. The majority of those surveyed agreed that integrating into a company's business model ESG will give it a competitive advantage in global markets, and that a focus on social and environmental performance makes a positive contribution to the bottom line. That's fantastic news, but there's some other news as well. Despite this support, we notice there's still an important minority that see many barriers to integrating ESG, such as limited staff or resources, cost, lack of capabilities in-house, and a feeling internally that ESG is not of significant benefit to the business. Even among ESG proponents, the integration of ESG is acknowledged to be quite difficult and can be quite costly as well. There is good news, however, is that companies are showing an active interest in obtaining more information relating to ESG topics such as climate change risks and opportunities, environmental operational footprint reduction, health and safety, just to name a few. They're looking for publications, reports, websites, and forums actually such as this one that the Chamber is putting on today to not only learn more about ESG topics, but then to challenge themselves on what does it mean for them and what do they need to do about it. So for us at EDC, we're looking closely at the survey results to, one, better inform our understanding of the state of Canadian export markets when it comes to sustainability, and perhaps even more importantly, how EDC can help. So thanks you again to the Chamber of Commerce for the opportunity to introduce the panel. And with that, I would like to pass it to Kent Caulfield, who's EY's ESG market leader and Chief Sustainability Officer. Kent will be working as your moderator today for introducing our distinguished panel. So with that, Kent, I will pass the baton over to you.
Thank you very much, Justine, and thank you very much for sharing the EDC. Those survey results are very interesting, and I think set the table well for the panel today. There are a few things there to think about and maybe relate your own stories on as you go through the questions that we have for the next little bit. We're really pleased to have with us Troy McDonald, the Assistant Treasurer and Risk Management of Sustainability for Tourmaline, Elizabeth Alves, VP Energy and Strategy for Cogeco, Lisa Marcuzzi, VP Head of Corporate Affairs, Legal and ED&I for ArcelorMittal Dofasco, and David Connolly, VP of Strategy and Corporate Affairs for Vital Metals. So welcome, you guys. It's a terrific panel, and we're really pleased to have you all with us today. So as we move towards COP27, we move towards more integration of ESG into real operations. I think our experience at EY would be our clients are moving past awareness. And I say that knowing that there are still some that are in that awareness and learning stage, but many now have identified key stakeholders. They understand why they have to do ESG. In many cases, they want to do ESG for reasons I think that were highlighted in the survey that Justine just referred to. But I think maybe to kick things off, I'd really like to hear from each of you as to how each of your organizations are integrating ESG into your operations, and maybe highlight a few positive impacts, things that you've seen that are giving momentum or providing support for your own ESG. So we'll go around the table, and maybe Troy, I'll start with you, please.
Yeah, thank you, Kent. We are very proud at Tourmaline to be the largest natural gas company in Canada. Since 2013, we've increased our production by over 490%, while also reducing our Scope 1 intensity by 40%. Tourmaline strives to generate the most sustainable, lowest carbon-intensive natural gas molecule in the world. Many of the initiatives we have executed have yielded returns on ESG, including emissions reductions, fresh water, using less fresh water, while also these things allow us to reduce our operating costs and make us more efficient. One of the things we're most proud of at Tourmaline is that we set a target to reduce our absolute methane emissions on an absolute basis of 25% by 2023, using 2018 as a base. We achieved that 3 years early. So again, I think that just highlights the power of technology and initiatives and companies doing the right thing. We're also a proud member of the NGIF Fund, which is supported by Narcan, which allows methane abatement, clean tech technologies and companies to use our facilities to test their instrumentation, their products, and we have that backed by the University of Calgary. Lastly, just focusing on water, we strive to reduce all fresh water in operations. We are the biggest recycling of water in the oil and gas sector in BC and Alberta. We recycle all our water that we produce. So again, we're striving to reduce our fresh water. And the power of Canadian natural gas, I just want to highlight briefly to the audience, is that we will be the first Canadian natural gas producer in Canada to sell gas to the US Gulf Coast to go to LNG exports. And if you were to assume all that natural gas that we are going to be selling to this market starting next year was to displace coal, we would effectively be net zero on Scope 1 emissions already. So again, there's a lot of power of replacing high carbon intensive energies with lower carbon intensive energies as we do this transition. Thanks, Kent.
Thank you, Troy. Elizabeth, maybe we'll go to you next. And just before you start, I will remind the audience, We will be taking questions. So if you have your Slido app open, please log your questions in there and we'll monitor them, and we have some time at the end to take your questions. So Elizabeth, please.
Sure, thanks, Ken. So in terms of how we integrate ESG into our operations, at Cogeco, it's pretty simple. It all starts with strategy, and you can see it just from my title, right? I'm Vice President, Enterprise Strategy and Sustainability. So these two topics, as a starting point, are under the same functional head. And the way we look at it at Cogeco is we don't think about it as, a sustainability strategy. We think about it as a sustainable business strategy. So, when you start with that kind of mindset, it sets the tone. And ESG is not viewed then as something that's separate or managed in silos. So the ESG agenda really needs to be closely aligned to your core operations. That's the only way to make it work. So it has to be anchored first at the strategic level in your purpose, in your governance processes, in your strategic planning process, and then it gets cascaded downwards, across the organization to our individual business units who are, full participants as part of the strategy definition process. And subsequently, it gets layered into stakeholder engagement activities, whether it be with our customers, our employees, our communities, our suppliers, and so forth. So really, it's really about embedding ESG into every aspect of the business, from strategy to operating models, to your operating plans, to your day-to-day operations, your financial decisions, and everything in between. What we do at Cogeco is we do embed ESG metrics or evaluation criteria into our daily ways of working. For example, whether it be in terms of how we analyze capital requests, there's always an ESG lens that's applied to it, whether it be when we conduct, RFPs out to the market, when we update HR policies, when the business units come and present their monthly business performance reviews. It's part of the elements that are integrated in it. And it's also important to incentivize sustainability contributions that are driven by your business units and their employees. So we do that at Cogeco. There is sustainability criteria that's part of our short-term incentive plan. So there's targets that are there annually. And if we want to get our bonus, we need to achieve these targets. So it's about incentivizing the behavior that you want to drive that is going to position you to, pursue that sustainable business strategy mindset. And, you asked the question about some of the positive impacts we're seeing because of this. There's so many of them. When you think about it, it's from a brand recognition or notoriety perspective. Cogeco has had a very long-standing tradition of social involvement, social engagement with its communities. It's our trademark, our differentiating factor. We're recognized for that. Our employees are part of our communities. They're our customers as well. And I think also from an employee engagement perspective, we've definitely seen a sense of pride from our employees when they say, we work for this company that really takes sustainability to heart, that incorporates it into our, business strategy. So at the end of the day, I know we hear it a lot, but ESG just makes good business sense as long as it's inherently part of the way you do business and not something that's on the side or managed separately. I mean, you're positioning yourself for a whole variety of positive impacts.
So that's a great overview. And I love your everyone wants to get a bonus comment. One of the first questions we ask when we go to spend time with clients is, are you rewarded in your performance management process for sustainable outcomes? And if the answer is no, that's usually where we start the discussion. So that's good for you. That's awesome. Lisa, maybe I'll turn to you now, please.
Thank you, Elizabeth. So much resonated strategy-wise and how we're integrating here at Dofasco. Integrating ESG into our operations is not something new for ArcelorMittal Dofasco. Our product is steel, our strength is people. I'm told we hired our first environmental engineer back in the early 1970s. In 2019, Dofasco was first named one of the world's most sustainable companies by the Dow Jones Sustainability Group Index. Subsequent year named market sector leader in basic material sectors on that index, the only Canadian company named. Further, became a norm for us. Dofasco developed and distributed a sustainability report in print form and delivered it to our community. At the time, our sustainability commitment involved a focus on what we called a triple bottom line of environmental responsibility, commitment to community, and financial performance, which resulted in sustained shareholder value, as well as creating value for our customers, our communities, and our employees. That strategic thinking continues today. We're integrating ESG into our business to meet the demands of all of our stakeholders and the demands for transparency and accountability. We're focused on a competitive cost position versus competition, but also taking into account society's expectations for a more circular and lower carbon economy. This allows us to make the right decisions about investments, our investment priorities, and building a strong, build the strongest platform for the company. And this long-term strategic thinking is essential if we want to ensure continued commercial success and to generate the support of all of our stakeholders and our long-term leadership in the steel sector. Why do we want to be a leader, and why everybody is integrating ESG into their business, moving from awareness to actually making it part of everyday business decisions in our strategy, is it definitely delivers on that competitive edge, increased market share, support from our shareholders and our investors, policy support and influence. Key, especially I think, last year or so, is the improved talent attraction, hiring and retention, societal impact. Here in Hamilton, ArcelorMittal Dofasco is the world's first major steelmaker to move to cleaner steel with our approximate $1.8 billion decarbonization project. Our new steelmaking stream is going to improve advanced manufacturing for operations, maintenance, technology staff, as well as improved health and safety and operational efficiencies. It's also going to contribute to the sustainability of well-paying, skilled positions in advanced manufacturing in Canada. It's going to give our employees an opportunity to work in a technologically advanced business on steelmaking assets. And it gives us a huge competitive advantage where customers are demanding that steel be as clean as possible. We truly believe that decarbonization is not only the right thing to do, it's smart and it's the competitive thing to do.
Well, that's a great closing statement, Lisa. Thank you for that, because I believe it's true. It adds competitive advantage when it's executed well. And I love your reference to enterprise or health and safety, because I do believe, as you think about it, the component of talent and talent management, talent acquisition and retention is a real big piece that our employees, all of our employees, are paying attention to. And certainly, last but not least, David, I'd love to hear from you as well.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Kent. And of course, the earlier speakers have said most of it, but very much aligned with Elizabeth's comments. But coming at it from a different direction, we're a small company. We currently have less than 100 employees, but we are Canada's first miner of rare earths in the Northwest, and we do that in the Northwest Territories, and we process those, do the metallurgical processing in Saskatoon. Now, how do rare earths relate to ESG? Well, rare earths are very essential commodities to enable the green and digital economies. So no rare earths, there's definitely no electrical vehicles, and there's no transition from the internal combustion engine, there's no wind turbines, etc. So when you position yourself as the company in Canada and the only one or two suppliers in North America that will be enabling the green economy, you're under a lot of pressure to make sure that you also have very good ESG credentials. No one wants to buy an electric vehicle that has a greater life cycle carbon footprint than an internal combustion engine because of the way the mining or the metallurgical processing is done. And I'm sure that's similar in the steel industry as well. So from day one, my Title II has strategy in it. I was essentially the first hire My responsibilities include ESG and trying to ensure that's not siloed, but accepted across the organization. So in the last 3 years, we've built a mine, but we've done it differently. We've adopted technology from other industries that have eliminated the use of water, chemicals, and we don't produce tailings. So if you come to our mine site, you'll see one big X-ray and a huge conveyor belt, and that X-ray does the separation. We live in the Northwest Territories. The majority of our population is Indigenous, and so we've worked very hard to ensure we have a significant Indigenous workforce. Across Canada, in the mineral industry, 12% is the average. We exceed 70%. So because it's very important for us to work with and engage with our communities, and hopefully at some point have them actually being equity owners. In the same way, we reach out to our communities every day, both in the procurement side and on the contracting side. So from our point of view, being a small company, we started on day one to adapt it as one of our guiding principles. And we've used that both as we applied applied and adapted and adopted new technology, and also towards essentially being a majority Indigenously. If you come to our site, we're a majority Indigenous operation. We haven't yet achieved Indigenous equity, but we certainly hope to get there.
David, great opening comments, and thank you all for those opening comments. It's set us up well for the rest of the conversation. And David, I like the fact that you're a small company, because one of the things we're learning, certainly through our interactions with the communities, is that ESG is not just for big companies, which I think is something that is an early fallacy that needed to be addressed. That to participate in any part of the supply chain, and again, David, you're a great example of that, having ESG embedded in your strategy and how you execute it actually gives you an advantage, and supply chains are going to continue to demand it. So there's really a role here for all sizes of organizations, big, small, and in between. So maybe on that, I'll just pick up on the theme of, and it was woven through some of all of your opening comments, is that there is really a linkage between the E and the S and the G. I'll often get asked the question, I'm based in Calgary, Kent, really the only thing that matters is the E part's all we're paying attention to. And I kind of say, no, that's not right. I mean, it's important, but the S and the G are equally watched by stakeholders, depending on what group they're in. I'll often get asked the question, well, why is the E first then? Shouldn't the G be first? Because if you have governance right, isn't the rest of it all right? And that's fair enough. But the truth is that each of the parts of ESG are inextricably linked. And you have to execute across all three of them really to get the full impact of what happens when you really place societal value or talent as one of the core outcomes or objectives of your organization. And so maybe I'll start by saying, and I know a couple of you are in the steel industry or directly or indirectly related to it, so maybe with a bit of an overview of that, but how can Canada's private sector really integrate ESG into core operations to drive a positive impact? And maybe we talked about positive impacts. What challenges will you face along the way as you go to embed ESG into what you do each and every day? And maybe Troy, I'll start with you again and see where we go from there.
Thanks, Kent. ESG basically means listening to your stakeholders. A lot of companies will do materiality assessments or significant assessments to determine what's critical or very important to them. And then you prioritize those initiatives to make sure that everyone's aligned with the company's interest. Embedding ESG for your company, including private companies, is a journey. First of all, without data, you can't measure your performance. Having great data, I'm an accountant by trade, is crucial because you can't fix what you can't track. Another thing I think would be challenging for smaller to private companies is that they don't have the staff or the technologies and capabilities to monitor these things. As a larger company, we have 10 people responsible for ESG. So again, it's investing in this because it's crucial to your long-term success. That said, working in ESG basically means you're a consensus builder. You have to take a lot of divergent views and bring them together to find what the strategy should be for a company. Again, engineers are quite technical. We have management that has great ambition, and you have to try and find that pathway to get there. And I think just generally the biggest challenge for Canada is that many of us do the right thing and we incorporate ESG in our operations, but we need to demonstrate to the world that every product or service we generate has some of the most robust regulations, voluntary reporting, also inclusion, diversity, and governance regimes. So again, I think being Canadian, that made in Canada stamp is very important. And I think we should be very proud of what we are doing and make sure we get that out to the world, that if you buy Canada, you're buying some of the most sustainable products in the world.
Great comments. I'm imagining, Lisa, you have a point of view as well from Dofasco.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, clearly from the discussion so far, where the Canadian companies are ever facing increasing demands and expectations from all of our stakeholders to be proactive in managing these ESG risks and opportunities as part of our business strategies. You know, the investors are demanding that we evaluate our ESG, that's the non-financial performance, in addition to our financial performance. Communities no longer tolerate negative impact from the business. The governments are mindful of the voters and what they want. Customer supply chain demands, our customers' overall sustainability performance is dependent upon that continuous supplier development, management, and transparency. Already talked about people increasingly want to work for companies that take sustainability seriously and have a clear purpose before making money. They want their personal values to align with the corporate values. You know, the demands for ever increasing sustainability practices, you know, they benefit both our bottom line and the greater impact on the community. And there's definitely a demand for greater transparency about how we're conducting our business. You know, Canadian companies are being asked to carry on business ethically and responsibly. And we're seeing customers are willing to pay more for products and services that are regarded as sustainable or coming from socially, environmentally responsible companies. You know, at a global level, ArcelorMittal's purpose is inventing smarter steels for a better world, and having a clear set of integrated ESG priorities allows us to deliver on those goals and to reward our stakeholders. You know, we have the technical and R&D efforts are underway to determine a path to net zero, and it's part of integrating the E, the S, and the G. I'm certainly, I'm a lawyer by trade. I'm certainly not a technical expert, but I can just give a few examples of our construction and automotive supply chain. Stelligence, which is enabling architects and engineers to design building solutions to minimize the material use while maximizing space, flexibility, and recyclability. Our S in motion solutions includes, for automotive, includes a body in white chassis, battery pack steel solutions for those electric vehicles, and enable the car makers to extend their drive range and enhance safety. You know, those are just a few examples. We've got challenges. You know, what are we facing along the way as we're trying to further embed ESG? I would say that our biggest challenge in the steel industry isn't about embedding ESG, but rather in an industry standard and having a meaningful measurement stream. You know, sustainability reports really should report on ESG visions and performance to a standard that has data that's defensible. It's got to go beyond a narrative. It allows our customers to be able to compare apples to apples. It allows our employees, everybody, to hold us accountable to what we've committed to.
Lisa, I love, that's a great response. Dave, I'll go to you in a second, but just to pick up on your last point, I do think where ESG is moving towards is, so this is going to sound self-serving from an accounting, from a big auditing firm, but the numbers have to be auditable, they have to be verified, and there has to be transparency so that we can benchmark them across peer groups, benchmark them across sectors, because I think that's really when people will start to believe that this is all really producing results, is you know, that these numbers aren't just they're not a branding or a marketing effort. They're part of who you are, and you hold yourselves accountable as KPIs. So that was a great comment. And David, just kind of last word on that to you, just because I think you'll have a great point of view on it.
Certainly agree with the comments to date, and particularly in attracting employees in a difficult, challenging marketplace. Having a high perception of your ESG or good ESG, being viewed as being good practitioners of ESG, definitely is an asset from that point of view. But I want to go to the 10,000 meter level. And I think the question was, what are the positive impacts of integrating ESG? If you want to be in business in a decade, if you want to be able to get financing in a decade, if you want to be able to sell your shares in a decade, you better be competitive when it comes to ESG. I don't think I can overstate it. We supply what's critical for the automobile industries around the world converting to electric vehicles. This is a document that I need to sign. This particular one is from Mercedes, but just about every supplier has every customer, and Mercedes is 6 or 7 steps down the supply chain, requires you to sign up today when you walk into, if you want to have those very necessary long-term offtake contracts. The second question, if not the first, is, Mr. Conley, to continue this discussion, can you give us an undertaking that by 2034 or 2035 or 2038, your supply chain will be net zero, including your mine, your concentrator, and your metallurgical processing facility? And will they be net zero? Otherwise, you're wasting your time with us, and there's the door. Likewise, if you wanted to join the Mining Association of Canada after January 1 of this year, you have to adopt towards sustainable mining. You cannot become a member unless you adopt it. So this is serious for the entire supply chain. So why is it important? And what's the positive impact? The positive impact is you get to stay in business, and you get to be able to go to a bank. If you're not, a bank is not going to lend you money unless you can show them that you have a very strong ESG program. There is no board of directors 10 years from now in an automobile company that wants to come in and say, we can't sell our Mercedes or a Nissan or our Ford or whatever it is because the customers don't like the carbon footprint of our vehicle, and therefore we can't pay a dividend or we can't repay your loan. So that's where we're at. It's important.
Great comments, David. And I loved your opening statement. I say this all the time to folks. I mean, ESG is taking time to develop, as it should. It's a global standard. It's not going to be a straightforward process, but it's not going to go away. And 10 years from now, it's just going to be clearer and clearer and clearer. So I loved your opening comments. And so, Elizabeth, I'll kind of direct the next question at you. And I mean, I'm going to do a little bit of an audible here because I really like the first question that came into Slido, and I think it ties into what we were planning. You know, depending on who you ask, they would say Canada is going to spend $2 trillion to, or will invest $2 trillion in sustainable financing in the next few years. There is a lot of capital out there to drive, a sustainable investment plan to drive, finance the transition. And so from your perspective, I mean, what challenges does Canada's current policy landscape present for business leaders to access sustainable financing? And maybe what actions have you taken within your organizations to attract some of that sustainable finance to get to net zero? And the first question, Slido, is maybe just maybe a quick comment. If the recession is coming, that we think it's all coming, does that impact the availability of that capital? Does that make you sharpen your pencil differently? How does how does it impact your ESG or sustainable finance investing or capital attraction if we end up with a slower economy? So Elizabeth, I'm putting you on the spot because I only planned you for the first part of the question, not the second part. So over to you.
Yeah, and I think we had agreed that I would answer the second part of the question, and my fellow panelists were going to answer that first part about the policy landscape. So in terms of steps that we've taken at Cogeco to move towards net zero. So We're not a company or a sector that has a huge carbon footprint to start from. But we did nonetheless want to show leadership at that level. So we have taken concrete actions to move towards net zero. We were the first telco in Canada to set science-based targets that were approved by the SBTI, meaning that they're aligned to that 1.5 degree pathway and thus considered very ambitious. It was very important for us that it have that level of ambition and that it was aligned to climate science. So basically, we have committed as an organization to reduce our scope 1 and 2 emissions by 65% by 2030 from a 2019 baseline. And we have drafted a very detailed climate action plan and have identified what are the different levers that we will need to be actioning in order to achieve that target. So it covers things like fleet electrification. We do have a very, very large fleet on both sides of the border, fleet fuel efficiency, ensuring energy efficiency in our buildings, our cable head ends, our delivery network, our facilities, and also investing in renewable energy. And from a transparency perspective, it was important for us to actually publish this climate action plan. So it is on our website, it's a very transparent, very detailed. We published it last year, and it is our intent to also continue to inform our stakeholders in the market as to how we're progressing on this climate action plan. So we will be providing, annual updates. And once we had set that kind of near-term target of 2030, immediately we kind of started the discussion thinking, okay, we need to go further than this and actually have that longer term target. So we did commit as well to net zero emissions by 2050, and we will be seeking SBTI approval on our net zero plan as well. So those are some of the actions that Cogeco is taking on the move towards net zero.
Very good, thank you. Lisa?
So I can speak in relation to making green steel possible. I'm sure everybody on the call is aware that our federal government is committed to reducing GHG by 40% by 2030, carbon neutrality by 2050. We see three areas of government policy that support the industry. That's decarbonization costs, emission costs, and import competition. Each of these has to provide a sufficient balance of investments to be made and to deter carbon leakage. On the decarbonization costs, it's public investment in clean technology, both for steelmaking and clean energy, hydrogen, carbon capture and utilization. It's access to abundant and affordable clean energy. Ontario's electricity input and manufacturing operations is the lowest intensities worldwide. Infrastructure for new fuels, hydrogen, which would replace natural gas. The challenge here, though, is to be able to compete with the lower prices of natural gas. There's import competition policy levels that we can level the playing field to ensure GHG reduction globally is encouraged and protected, and protecting our Canadian competitiveness. And then on emissions costs, such as carbon price and allocations, need to be mitigated so that the funds can be allocated to decarbonization capital operating investments, given the magnitude of the investments that are going to be required. ArcelorMittal, leading steel and mining company, has committed globally to reducing GHG emissions by 25% by 2030 and carbon neutrality by 2050. Not a secret, many of our customer segments like automotive and construction are demanding lower carbon steel. At the same time, the public and consumer interest is in lower carbon and eventuality net zero carbon steel. And it's through government programs and support that we get the opportunity to pivot to technology that's going to accomplish this for us. At a local level here in Hamilton, Ontario, Dofasco's $1.8 billion decarbonization projects is one of the first to help ArcelorMittal reach its global decarbonization goal. We locally are going to reduce CO2 emissions by 60% by 2028. Both our federal and Ontario governments provided direct investments into this project. in the form of grant and repayable loans. 400 million from our federal government, 500 million from the provincial Ontario government. Those investments are critical to our project to proceed, and they're the largest part of the reasons why we're out front globally. The path to net zero for large multinationals is only possible if we partner. We have these greater, broader partnerships with the levels of government, federally, provincially, and municipally. They demonstrate, these types of investments demonstrate the power of public and private partnerships to accelerate the progress in realizing low carbon steelmaking. Steelmaking in Hamilton for the next couple of generations, and because of these investments, and it establishes the path for carbon neutral steelmaking technology.
So maybe Lisa, I'm going to pick one other question off Slido here, because I think that it ties into what you're describing. Is that the role that federal and provincial governments can play, as providing either funding or funding programs to help accelerate, the transition to more sustainable finance? Is in your, and again, because you've got such a global view, is that what more advanced governments are doing?
That's certainly the argument that we're making. It was just earlier this month that we had the Prime Minister here with our global chairman, Mr. Middle was here celebrating that true partnership. And it really, truly is. We are the first steelmaking company that is executing on the decarbonization. Globally, we have 8, and the first one's happening in Hamilton, Ontario.
That's very helpful. David, I'd like to get your perspective on that question as well. And I know it's been a while, but just share your thoughts.
I think I can make 3 points, and they're probably just fine-tuning the points that have previously been made. There's definitely a role definitely a role for government. A significant piece of that role is in green energy infrastructure. There are many provinces and territories that simply don't have access to green energy. I know when I was with Chancellor Schultz and the Prime Minister in Quebec, Quebec was marketing very strongly from the critical minerals world, their low carbon footprint for their hydropower. We've heard from Lisa that Ontario does the same thing. So there's those provinces and territories that are seeking to be suppliers to the green economy have to stop saying, well, maybe by 2050 we'll get there. They have to be able to provide a document now that is bankable enough that their industry can supply that to their supply chain, give it to the supply chain. A second point is governments are very good at talking about the Canadian brand and how the whole world is going to pay more for the Canadian brand. And that the Canadian brand being the high ESG. And we do have, relative to the large jurisdictions, a good ESG performance. But the point is, many of their customers are not prepared to pay for it. So when you sit down through the supply chain and saying, here's our traditional cost and here's the increment for ESG, the basic position is, it's changing a little bit. I think either Lisa or Elizabeth pointed this out, but the basic position is, that's not our problem. You figure out how to give us the same Canadian product at the same cost, and you figure out how you're going to cover all the ESG cost, but it's not our problem to pay you more for it. There's a bit of modification in that, but without a strong policy and regulatory intervention by Western governments and governments that put a high priority on ESG, we're going to continue to be undercut by lower markets, and the customers are going to, well, at the same time wanting zero carbon in what they're saying, they're going to say, but we won't pay for it. So those are 2 points I think that we need to address sooner rather than later.
Great comments. And, globalization is going to go through a bit of a, I don't know if it's an update or a refit, given kind of the global uncertainty in certain parts of the world. And you can see clearly, and even in our discussions with our multinational clients, that having a strong ESG brand as a country, certainly as a company, is going to be a key differentiator, because they're going to want to understand how you're operating in a world that becomes a little more uncertain from a globalization perspective. So I think we'll pivot here a little bit, just conscious of time. And maybe I'll kind of go and give you an opportunity to kind of close out a little bit. But when we started the conversation, we asked about positive impacts and that you're seeing from each of your efforts. And I don't want to maybe end on too negative a note, but and a couple of you have listed challenges. But maybe what challenges are you seeing out there that might resonate with our audience? Something that you've seen, maybe you can provide some context or empathy for what's coming, and that they can anticipate it. And I think that would be just to share a little experience. And so maybe we'll start with go back with Lisa to start, and then we'll go David, Elizabeth, and Troy, please.
Probably starting with me because I've already said it. For us in the steel industry, it's measurement. There's no industry definition or standard for low carbon emission steelmaking. There's over 30 initiatives attempting to standardize embodied carbon emission accounting in the steel industry. We see the customer supply chain carbon emissions targets are ever growing. We see initiatives to define embodied carbon emissions in the steel industry multiplying, and then we have the risk of inconsistent standards escalating. And as an industry standard, if we had an industry standard, it would allow policy makers to incentivize the steel industry to decarbonize, and it provides customers with a comparable measurement of embodied carbon emissions in steel products. It provides that product transparency and comparability. That would be the big one for us.
So you'd say you'd love to see more of an information ecosystem that really does standardize some of that, whether it's through taxonomies, so that you can really compare and contrast on a relatively, similar basis.
Absolutely. I mean, it's what you had said earlier. Yep.
Yeah, no, it's coming. David?
I'm going to be less diplomatic. There's over 130, 150 different measurement tools out there. It seems everyone who wants to set up a small business, or every government who wants to deliver something that doesn't cost too much, decides they're going to create their own standard. And it's just creating a lot of confusion. We need to scale back drastically to a few standards that we can all collect data for, and we can all measure, and we can all report against. And this idea, the flavor of the month, that my organization is going to create a new standard and it's going to be the best in the world, I'm going to go out and sell it, and then government's going to come in and do another standard, and then the industry is going to come in and do another standard. No, somehow we need to get our arms around this very quickly. And maybe the steel industry and the critical mineral industry need different standards, but it's not 150 of them. And I suspect when it comes down to it, it's one standard, maybe with a few appendices that vary depending upon what the commodity is. So we're at risk of blowing this thing up because there's just way too many standards out there that are confusing and muddying the marketplace.
Is that a Canadian only problem, David, or is that
No, when I say 150, that's that number was actually spoken by Chancellor Schultz around the critical minerals table in Montreal in Germany, saying that we need to do something about this. What do we measure by? And you can create a process that does anything. You need to standardize it so it's 80% good for everyone, and let's move on with it.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. Elizabeth?
Yeah, I'm going to echo what David said. I think he took the words out of my mouth. Obviously, a couple of challenges I clearly see. I think some of them are in the process of being addressed. So namely, this existence of multiple ESG frameworks and the evolving ESG regulations. I think that with some of the regulations that are coming down the pipeline, it should help get more clarity and standardization, which would alleviate some of that challenge. However, for me, I would say ESG data management is one key challenge that is going to remain for many companies, both big, small, medium. It is for us as well at Cogeco, because ESG or sustainability, it's so broad and covers so many facets that you have to ask yourself, how does a company properly ensure that it understands, identifies, manages, and quantifies ESG related risks. And to do that, to me, it clearly highlights the need to have a very data-driven and tech-enabled risk management approach. And I don't think all companies are fully equipped to do that. So it's that's why we say it's a journey, right? It's going to take a little bit of time to be able to address all this.
I completely agree. And maybe I'll just ask a follow-up question, because I think that's a really good point. Is it your experience that the data exists, it's just in different pockets of the organization that are not getting used to asking for it? Or is it the data doesn't exist and you have to figure out how to capture it differently?
Well, to me, it's really about three key factors: data availability, data accuracy, and data transparency. So availability, do you even have the systems to be able to capture this data, extract it, ingest it, analyze it so that you can produce something that's reportable? So many times, we do have some processes that are manual. So even just getting that data, does it even exist out there? So availability. And then the data quality, that's a big one as well. How do you ensure that this data is complete, that it's accurate? That's where I personally agree that I think there should be third-party assurance over ESG data, because you don't know if you can rely on what these companies are reporting, right? So going that extra step of having it third-party assured, to me, ESG data is as important as financial data. So we should have the same processes around it as we do around financial reporting data. It should be the same rigor, the same control processes. And data transparency, I think with the regulations that are coming up, it's going to help in terms of saying this is what needs to be reported on, because right now each company kind of decides what they want to report on. So many times there's discussions internally like, do we want to report this? Do we not want to report this? Ooh, this might be, competitive information. Maybe we're not comfortable. So I think the transparency aspect of it with the upcoming regulations are going to help.
On behalf of CPA Canada, I think you've just become a spokesperson for third-party assurance. So I want to thank you for all accountants. But it is true, and jokes aside, what we're finding, and the simple example is when we go into GHG reporting, when we ask questions of the folks that have been responsible for capturing that reporting and try to apply to any kind of disclosure or auditing standards that we are used to in finance, they're just not there. And it's not that they don't know what they're doing. They know exactly what they're doing, but they've just never been publicly or had an audit done before. So it does create a bunch of great discussions, and it does create some changes in data management.
I am an accountant. That's why I think that way. I am an accountant as well.
Oh, that was clear. If you missed your calling if you weren't.
Right.
So Troy, over to you.
Yeah, no, I think Elizabeth said it perfectly. Data is crucial. The ISSB, our part of the IFRS Foundation, basically announced the standard this week that'll standardize some of the reporting requirements into financial statements. So you are slowly seeing this consensus come in. And as an industry, that's what we need. Like, we want to compare ourselves against our peers across the world. And SASB, I think, is very important for that, for comparability. But a couple other big issues I think that we're facing is just continuously evolving government policy that's quite fast. Again, we need dialogue. We share the government's ambition and their targets, but we need to make sure that the framework and how we get there, we can all agree on. So again, it's not that we're saying no to their ambition. It's just saying, let's sit down with us. Let's make a thoughtful playbook of how that will look. A lot of the new emerging technologies that will decarbonize us are on the tipping point of becoming economical and scalable, including carbon capture and so forth. So good, thoughtful government policy helps. And the last thing I want to mention is that we all have to make sure our ESG strategy is robust and that we are executing on our ESG journey today. Companies that aren't practicing what they preach will be labeled as greenwashing. And as an industry and as a whole, you just want to make sure that what you're saying, you're actually executing on today. And again, because the reputational damage could be quite punitive if you're not practicing what you preach.
Yeah, great comments, Troy. Really great comments. I believe that's true. I think people are going to be more astute at watching for greenwashing, and I think they're more likely to be punitive. And the flip side of that is, I think they're more likely to reward real earnest efforts that provide, fulsome responses and transparency. We do have a couple of minutes here, and so maybe I'll go to one question. We touched on it a couple of times, but maybe I'll just do a quick roundtable, and you can all give me kind of your 2-sentence response on this. which is, does Canada have right now, from your perspective, a good ESG brand? You know, is it when you compete in different markets, do you show up and say, "Oh, you're from Canada, you know, you're ESG, you know, you're advanced, your thinking's advanced"? We'll close on where is our brand and where would you like to see it in 10 years? And we'll go in reverse order, maybe from that last set of questions. So Troy, I'll start with you, and Elizabeth, David, and Lisa, and that'll bring us to probably the quarter past the hour. So Troy, you're shipping gas all over the world, hopefully. What's our brand like?
Yeah, I think that's a very important question. The issue we have as Canadians is that we have some of the most robust reporting currently in regulations, and we're competing across the world. So again, what happens is state-owned enterprises, a lot of other countries don't have that reporting. So it's very challenging for a Canadian company to compare themselves across the globe. And I think anecdotally, we know our social and governance practices are the best in class, best in the world. On the E side, again, we just need more robust data. For example, I can't compare our gas emissions to Russia because Russia doesn't report their emissions intensity from natural gas. So if we want to show the narrative why Canadian gas is so important versus the rest of the world, it's quite challenging. So yes, I'm hoping that changes. But anecdotally, you know, I think we can confidently say we're best in class currently.
I agree. Elizabeth?
Yeah, I would tend to agree with Troy. I mean, we operate in both Canada and the US. And I can say that, you know, on the Canadian side of things, the number of requests we get, questionnaires, requests for interviews to know more about our ESG program is much, much higher than similar requests we get in the US. It is starting, but I think definitely Canada is in a leadership position, I would say, in my view. Absolutely.
Yeah, great comment. David?
I'm going to say socially, we're a B plus. I think environmentally, I'm just going to give us a C plus. While we're probably quite high on things like water and taking care of the land, those jurisdictions that have very high carbon footprints for their energy, that just overwhelms everything else in terms of the amount of carbon that's being consumed. In terms of governance, I put a question mark because yes, in terms of traditional governance, we're starting to record and keep people accountable, have some transparency about it. But I believe we're going to have to shift to a governance that actually includes the traditional land owners as being part of the board members, or at least part of the decision makers. And out of 1,000 projects in Canada, you have a handful that have started moving that direction. So we've got a ways to go.
Yeah, good comments. Lisa, last word to you.
Being last, you just get to rely on those that went before you. I echo everything's been said. I think the only thing I would add is the role that we're playing in our respective industries and in trade associations, and the other is the information sharing and standards that we're asking for, and that is impacting the other jurisdictions. So do I think we're leading? Yes. I agree with David. I think we've, you know, the last point that he raised is critical. And I think, you know, Canada's got a lot of bad press when it comes to that. And it's a very valid point. And I say thank you for raising it, David. I think it was really a good point that we can all learn from.
Listen, I want to thank all you guys for a great conversation. Put you on the spot a few times, and I really loved your authentic responses to some of this. Like you guys, I'm very proud of our Canadian ESG efforts. I think we've done a lot, but I think we'll look back in 10 years, as David said, when we all have to do this, and we'll realize we're probably only 20 or 30% along the way of where we're going to end up being. And I think things like Indigenous reconciliation over the past 2 years have pointed out to us that we do have some blind spots still in the Canadian economy that we have to continue to address. And we're making strides, and I think we put the right effort in, but we still have a ways to go. And you guys have done a great job of articulating both the positive aspects and some of the challenges. And so on behalf of the Chamber and our audience, thank you guys very much. I'd like to thank the audience for their questions. We wove into where we were going, and so that worked out really well.